Imagine a car so broken, it's barely more than a whisper of what it once was. A '67 Stingray, hidden under layers of rust and secrets, left to rot in a small-town garage. But what if I told you its owner isn't who you think? A woman walks in, silver hair and a guarded smile, dropping off this wreck with one rule: no questions. Why? Because beneath the dents lies a story. A billionaire's past, a love lost in a crash, and a mystery even she's afraid to face. And the man fixing it? He's got ghosts of his own, ones he's buried in grease and steel for 20 years. What happens when two broken souls collide over a car that refuses to die? Stick around, because this isn't just a restoration, it's a revelation. If you're hooked on stories where kindness uncovers miracles and love rises from the ashes, hit that subscribe button down below. We're diving deep into this journey together, right here on Ten Kenqua Ban, and trust me, you won't want to miss a single turn of the wheel. The rain tapped a steady rhythm on the tin roof of Harper's garage, a weathered outpost, on the edge of Harmony, Pennsylvania. Nathan "Nate" Harper, 55 and graying at the temples, stood beneath the flickering glow of a single fluorescent bulb, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better days. The air smelled of oil and rust, a familiar comfort to a man who'd spent half his life coaxing broken machines back to life. Outside, the world blurred into a watercolor of dusk and drizzle, but inside, it was just Nate and the quiet hum of a life he'd settled into, one of solitude, routine, and echoes of a love long gone. He was about to lock up when the low rumble of an engine cut through the rain. Headlights pierced the gloom, and a car rolled into the gravel lot, its tires crunching like a sigh. Nate squinted through the streaked window. It was a Corvette, or what was left of one. The once sleek body was a patchwork of rust and dents, its silver paint peeling like old skin. He chuckled under his breath, muttering, "Well, ain't that a breathing pile of scrap?" But something about it tugged at him, a whisper of beauty beneath the decay. The driver's door creaked open, and a woman stepped out, her figure framed by the storm. She wore a plain gray coat, damp at the shoulders, and carried herself with a quiet grace that didn't match the wreck she'd arrived in. As she approached, Nate pushed the door open, the bell above jingling faintly. Up close, she was older than he'd guessed. 60, maybe, with silver hair tucked under a scarf and eyes that held a depth he couldn't place. She stopped just inside, raindrops clinging to her lashes, and said, "I need this fixed. Make it run again. No questions, please." Her voice was soft but firm, like someone used to being heard. Nate raised an eyebrow, glancing past her to the Corvette. "That's a tall order, ma'am. She's seen better days, decades even. You sure you don't want something newer?" He meant it half as a joke, but her lips tightened and she shook her head. "It's not about new. It's about this one. Can you do it?" There was a plea buried in her words, one she didn't voice outright. Nate's hand stilled on the rag. He'd heard that tone before, 20 years ago when Ellen, his late wife, had begged him to fix her old pickup one last time before the cancer took her. He nodded slowly. "All right, I'll take a look. Name's Nate Harper, by the way." "Clara," she replied, hesitating as if the name felt foreign on her tongue. She didn't offer a last name, and Nate didn't press. She turned to leave, then paused, glancing back. "Thank you, Nate. I'll check in soon." With that, she disappeared into the rain, leaving the Corvette behind like a ghost she couldn't bear to face. Nate dragged the car inside, the tow chain clanking against the concrete floor. Under the harsh light, he saw more than just rust. There was history here. The leather seats were cracked but stitched with care, the dashboard scratched with faint initials he couldn't quite read. He ran a hand along the hood, feeling an odd pull, like the car was waiting to tell him something. "What's your story, huh?" he murmured, half to himself. He popped the driver's seat forward to check the floorboard, and that's when he saw it. A glint of silver caught in the shadows. Kneeling, he fished out a delicate necklace, its chain tangled but intact. A small pendant dangled from it, engraved with the words "To my light" in a script worn smooth by time. Nate held it up, the bulb overhead casting tiny reflections across the garage. It wasn't cheap trinket, it was personal, heavy with meaning. Clara's, no doubt. She'd dropped it, or maybe left it behind without knowing. For a moment, he pictured Ellen's face the way she'd beam when he'd fix something small, a toaster, a radio, just to see her smile. She'd called him her light, too, once. The memory stung, sharp and sweet, and Nate closed his fist around the necklace. He wouldn't pawn it or toss it in a drawer. He'd keep it safe, give it back when Clara returned. It was the least he, you see, could do for a stranger who'd trusted him with her wreck, and maybe, just maybe, something more. Outside, the rain softened to a whisper, and Nate stepped to the doorway, peering into the fading dusk. Clara's figure was long gone, but her presence lingered, woven into the mystery of the car and the weight of the necklace in his pocket. He didn't know why she'd chosen him, or why this battered Corvette mattered so much. But as he locked the garage and headed home to his quiet little house down the road, a flicker of curiosity stirred in him, something he hadn't felt in years. Back in the garage, the Corvette sat silent, its rusted frame glowing faintly under the dim bulb. It was more than a job now. It was a thread, thin and fragile, tying Nate to a woman named Clara, and to a story neither of them yet understood. Somewhere beneath the dust and ruin, there was light waiting to be uncovered, and for the first time in a long while, Nate wanted to find it. The next morning broke over Harmony with a hesitant sun, its rays slipping through the garage's grimy windows to dance across the Corvette's rusted hood. Nate Harper stood before it, coffee mug in one hand, the other tracing the jagged lines of decay that marred the car's once proud frame. He'd slept fitfully, the necklace in his pocket tugging at his thoughts like a half-remembered dream. It wasn't just a job anymore. This wreck had a soul, and he was determined to hear it whisper. He set the mug down on a workbench cluttered with wrenches and oil-stained rags, then pulled on his worn leather gloves. The Corvette groaned as he pried open the hood, revealing an engine caked in grime but oddly intact, as if someone had cared for it long ago. Nate whistled low. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" he said, his voice echoing in the empty garage. He started with the basics, draining old oil, checking spark plugs, each task a ritual that steadied him, like a prayer to the machines he'd always understood better than people. As he worked, he noticed the scratches, not random nicks, but deliberate marks etched into the dashboard's faded wood. He leaned closer, squinting under the fluorescent light. The letters JAMES emerged, faint but unmistakable, carved with a knife or a key by a hand that had trembled, or loved. Nate's chest tightened. A name, a story. He thought of Clara's eyes, the way they'd flickered with something unspoken when she'd dropped off the car. Was James hers? A husband? A child? He shook his head, pushing the questions down. She'd said no questions, and he'd honor that, for now. The bell above the door jingled, startling him. Clara stepped in, carrying a small tin box that smelled faintly of cinnamon and butter. Her scarf was gone today, silver hair falling softly around her shoulders, and she wore a sweater that looked too big, like it belonged to someone else. "Morning, Nate," she said, her voice warmer than the day before. "I brought something. A thank you." Nate wiped his hands on his jeans and took the tin, popping it open to reveal a stack of homemade snickerdoodles. The scent hit him like a memory. Ellen used to bake them on rainy Sundays, filling their little house with sweetness. "You didn't have to," he said, offering a crooked smile. "But I'm not complaining. Been a while since I had anything this good." Clara's lips curved, a small victory against the sadness that clung to her. "It's nothing fancy, just something to keep you going while you wrestle with that beast." She nodded toward the Corvette, her gaze lingering on it a beat too long. They stood there, the silence stretching comfortably between them. Nate gestured to a stool by the workbench. "Take a load off if you want. I was just getting started. She's a fighter, this one. Got more life in her than she looks." Clara hesitated, then sat, folding her hands in her lap. She watched him work, her presence quiet but steady, like a shadow that didn't demand attention. "Ever driven one of these?" Nate asked, loosening a bolt. "Corvettes, I mean. Back in their prime, they were something else." Clara's eyes softened. "Once or twice, a long time ago. They're loud, aren't they? Like they're shouting at the world." Nate chuckled. "That's one way to put it. Ellen, my wife, she loved the sound. Said it made her feel alive. We'd take her old Chevy out sometimes just to hear it roar." He didn't know why he'd said it, but Clara didn't flinch. She tilted her head, listening. "Ellen sounds like she was special," she said gently. "She was." Nate's voice dipped, rough around the edges. "Gone 20 years now. Cancer. But yeah, she was special." He glanced at Clara, expecting her to change the subject, but she didn't. "Time doesn't make it easier, does it?" she said, almost to herself. "You just learn to carry it." Nate nodded, surprised by how her words landed. Soft, but heavy with truth. He wanted to ask about James, about the necklace, but the moment felt too fragile. Instead, he reached for a wrench and turned back to the car. "Let's see if we can get this old girl to sing again." He fiddled with the dashboard, brushing dust from a small panel when his fingers grazed a hidden catch. A faint click, and an old radio flickered to life, static crackling before settling into a melody. Frank Sinatra's "The Way You Look Tonight." The notes filled the garage, warm and haunting, and Clara froze. Her hands clenched in her lap and her breath hitched. Before Nate could say anything, tears spilled down her cheeks, silent but unstoppable. "Clara!" he started, stepping toward her, but she stood abruptly, the stool scraping against the floor. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. I need to go." She fled, the tin of cookies still open on the bench, the song trailing after her like a ghost. Nate stood there, stunned, the wrench slipping from his hand to clatter on the concrete. The radio played on, Sinatra's voice weaving through the air, and he saw it again. Those scratches, JAMES, glowing, faintly in the light. Clara hadn't just left a car with him. She'd left a piece of her past, raw and bleeding, and he'd stumbled right into it. He turned off the radio, the silence rushing back like a tide. The necklace in his pocket felt heavier now. A key, too. Something he didn't yet understand. Clara was running from more than a song. She was running from a wound, and Nate, for reasons he couldn't name, wanted to help her face it. Not because he had to, but because something in her quiet strength, her broken edges, called to the part of him that still believed in fixing what was lost. Outside, the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the Corvette. Nate picked up a cookie, took a bite, and tasted cinnamon, and maybe, just maybe, a chance at something new. The garage felt emptier after Clara's sudden departure, the silence thicker than the dust settling on the Corvette's hood. Nate Harper stood by the workbench, staring at the open tin of snickerdoodles, their cinnamon scent mingling with the oil and metal of his world. The echo of Sinatra's voice lingered in his mind, a melody that had unlatched something in Clara, something she wasn't ready to face. He didn't know her story, not yet, but he knew that look, the way grief could hide behind a steady gaze until a single note cracked it open. Outside, the sun had burned off the morning haze, leaving harmony bathed in a golden glow. Nate picked up his wrench, determined to keep working. The Corvette wasn't just a job now. It was a bridge, fragile but real, between him and the woman who'd left her tears behind. He tightened a bolt, then paused, running his thumb over the scratched JAMES on the dashboard. "Whoever you were," he murmured. "You're still holding her tight." Days passed, and Clara didn't return. Nate threw himself into the car, stripping rusted parts, sanding rough edges, each task a quiet promise to see it through. He'd catch himself glancing at the door, half expecting the bell to jingle, but it stayed silent. The necklace sat in his pocket, a small weight he couldn't ignore. He'd meant to give it back that day, but now it felt like a tether, a reason for her to come back. On the fourth afternoon, the bell finally rang. Nate looked up, his heart giving a small, unexpected lurch. Clara stepped inside, her gray coat swapped for a navy sweater, her silver hair loose and catching the light. She carried no tin this time, just a faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice steady but soft. "I didn't mean to run off like that." Nate set down his rag, wiping his hands on his jeans. "No apology needed. I've seen my share of tough days. That radio, it caught you off guard, didn't it?" She nodded, stepping closer to the Corvette. "It was his song. Our song. I wasn't ready to hear it." She didn't say James, but Nate heard the name in the spaces between her words. He pulled the stool out for her, the same one she'd sat on before. "Take a seat if you want. I've been keeping her company." Clara sat, her hands folding in her lap like a habit. She watched him work, the clank of tools filling the quiet. After a while, Nate broke the silence. "Ellen, my wife, she had a song too. Moon River. Used to play it on this old record player we had. I couldn't listen to it for years after. She passed." Clara's gaze met his, a flicker of understanding passing between them. "What changed?" she asked. "Time, mostly, and fixing things." He gestured to the garage. "Keeps my hands busy, my head quiet. You ever find something like that?" She looked at the Corvette, her fingers brushing the air above its fender. "I used to. With him. We'd drive for hours, no place to be, just the road and us. After he was gone, I stopped. Everything stopped." Her voice wavered, but she steadied it. "That's why this car matters. It's all I've got left of." "Those days?" Nate nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle into him. He thought of Ellen's Chevy, how he'd sold it after she died because keeping it hurt too much. "I get it," he said. "More than you'd think." They fell into an easy rhythm after that. Clara watching, Nate working, their silences punctuated by small talk about the weather, the town, anything but the past. She didn't cry again, and he didn't push. But as the afternoon wore on, something shifted. Clara stood, stepping closer to the car. "Can I help?" she asked almost shyly. "Nothing big, just something to do." Nate grinned, surprised. "Sure. How about wiping down that fender? Got a clean rag right here." He handed her one and she took it, her movements careful but sure. They worked side by side, the Corvette between them like a shared secret. She laughed once, a small, rusty sound, when he smudged grease on his cheek and he wiped it off, chuckling. "See? You're a natural." She smiled, a real one this time, and reached for the dashboard to steady herself. Her fingers brushed the carved James, and Nate saw her tense, her breath catching. He acted on instinct, stepping in. "Here, let me..." He grabbed a can of polish, but his elbow knocked it over, oil spilling across the concrete. Clara gasped, then laughed again, louder as they both scrambled for rags. "Nice save," she teased, her eyes bright with something new. "Life, maybe." Nate laughed too, the sound echoing in the garage. They mopped up the mess, knees brushing as they knelt, and when they stood, Clara's hand lingered near the dashboard. She traced the JAMES with a trembling finger, her voice barely a whisper. He'd like this, seeing it come back. Nate froze, caught off guard by the rawness of it. Before he could respond, she looked at him, her eyes glistening but steady. "You're good at this, Nate. Not just the car, the rest of it. She didn't explain, but he knew. Knew she meant. The space he'd given her, the quiet way he'd let her be. He swallowed, nodding. I try. Sometimes that's all we've got. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the necklace. Found this, by the way. Figured it's yours. Clara's breath hitched as she took it, her fingers closing around the pendant. Thank you, she whispered, clutching it to her chest. She didn't leave this time. She stayed, watching him work until the sun dipped low, painting the garage in shades of amber. And Nate felt it. A spark, faint but real, flickering in the shadows. They'd both carried too long. The days grew shorter in harmony, the late October air carrying a crisp edge that settled into the bones of Nate Harper's garage. He'd grown used to Clara's visits now, her quiet presence a steady hum beneath the clatter of his tools. The Corvette was taking shape, rust sanded away, new parts gleaming where old ones had failed. But it wasn't just the car coming back to life. Something else was stirring, something Nate hadn't felt since Ellen's laughter filled their home, a fragile, unnamed hope. Clara arrived that afternoon with a thermos of coffee, the kind that steamed when she poured it into 2 chipped mugs. She handed one to Nate, her fingers brushing his for a fleeting second, and he caught a whiff of her scent. Lavender, soft and unexpected. Thought you could use this, she said, settling onto her stool. It's getting cold out there. Nate took a sip, the warmth spreading through him. Much obliged. You're spoiling me, Clara. First cookies, now this. I might start charging you less. He winked and she smiled, a real one, crinkling the corners of her eyes. It was a sight he was starting to crave, like the first light after a long night. He turned back to the Corvette, peeling back a layer of chipped paint on the door. Underneath, a flash of silver caught his eye. Not the dull gray he'd expected, but a metallic sheen that hinted at something rare. He grabbed a scraper, working carefully, and soon a patch of original color emerged. Well, I'll be, he muttered, stepping back. This ain't just any Corvette. Looks like a 67. Stingray, limited run. Someone painted over it to hide what it was. Clara's mug paused halfway to her lips. You're sure? Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Pretty damn sure, Nate said, running a hand through his graying hair. These babies were worth a fortune back in the day. Still are, if you find the right buyer. Who'd cover up something like this? He glanced at her, expecting curiosity, but her face had gone still, like a lake before a storm. Before he could ask, the bell jingled, and a stranger strode in, a man in a crisp suit, too polished for harmonies. Dusty streets. He was tall, mid-40s, with a jawline that looked carved from stone and eyes that scanned the garage like he owned it. Nathan Harper? He asked, his tone clipped. That's me, Nate said, wiping his hands on his jeans. Who's this? The man ignored the question, his gaze locking on the Corvette. I'm here for the car. It's leaving with me today. Where's the owner? Nate bristled, stepping between the man and the vehicle. Hold up, pal. I don't know who you are, but this car's mine to fix until Clara says otherwise. She's the one who brought it here. The man's lips thinned. Clara doesn't decide that anymore. I represent her interests. Name's Victor Lang, her assistant. She's been distracted. I'm taking it off her hands. He pulled out a checkbook, scribbling a figure that made Nate's eyebrows shoot up. That should cover your time. Load it up. Nate didn't touch the check. I don't work for you, Victor. I work for her. She wants it fixed, and I gave my word. His voice was low, steady, the kind of stubborn Ellen used to tease him about. Victor's eyes narrowed, but before he could argue, Clara stood, her thermos clattering to the bench. Victor, stop! Her tone was sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. She stepped forward, her small frame suddenly commanding. The car stays. I hired Nate, not you. Victor turned, his expression a mix of surprise and irritation. Clara, this is ridiculous. You've let this drag on too long. It's a liability. It's mine.